We now present For the Record.
Welcome to For the Record. I'm Will Keneally. It's been more than a decade in the making since the redrawing of the state legislative districts after the 2010 census. Democrats have been looking forward to the opportunity to have different and what they would argue are fair maps in Wisconsin. And we appear poised to have those new maps, whether by the legislature and governor agreeing to draw new lines together or the state Supreme Court weighing in on the matter themselves. Joining us now to break this all down is Ruth Conniff, editor-in-chief of the Wisconsin Examiner. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So it's really interesting. We're at a weird place in Wisconsin where we have Republicans in the legislature and perhaps the Democratic governor agreeing on a piece of legislation as controversial as these maps. How did we get here?
It has really been wild because the fight over what one federal judge described as the worst partisan gerrymander in the country in Wisconsin, where Republicans in a state that's 50-50 politically have been able to seize 2/3 of legislative seats almost, if you combine them, 2/3 supermajority in the Senate and somewhat less than that, but still a huge majority in the Assembly. That battle has gone on, and it's gone through many rounds. The U.S. Supreme Court has weighed in. The Democrats and voting rights advocates were unable to get new maps in the last round after the last census. And so now, with a liberal majority on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, the first act of that new liberal majority was to say, these maps are unconstitutional. And the partisan gerrymander is so bad. And also the districts are broken up in such a weird way where they're non-contiguous. There's little portions of one district that's completely disconnected, from the rest of it. We have to have new maps. And so that set off this, furor. Where we are today is that in order to short circuit the Supreme Court choosing among options that various parties in the lawsuit presented, the Republican-dominated legislature decided to push through the exact proposal that Democratic Governor Tony Evers made. And so they're basically daring him to sign his own maps. And Democrats in the legislature, after this more than a decade of being in this super minority and feeling really distrustful, profoundly distrustful of the other party, don't buy it, and they didn't vote for it. But Republicans voted for it overwhelmingly, with only one Democrat in each chamber. And Evers has said he would sign the maps if they were identical to the maps he proposed, which they are, with the small difference that they're not implemented until November. That could be seized upon as a difference if he didn't want to sign them, if he wanted to veto them. But he's basically indicated that he's planning to sign these maps. And so there's a lot of buzz about what are the Republicans really up to. They can't be giving up power willingly. There must be some plot that involves a strategy where someone will sue and these maps will be overturned. And so a lot of people are telling Evers, don't sign these maps. There are other options before the court that are more favorable to Democrats. The Evers maps are considered extremely fair by analysts, but they maintain a slight Republican majority. After all this time, some Democrats just can't stand that. They feel like the state, which has voted statewide for Democrats repeatedly, should be able to have a Democratic majority in the legislature. And then there's just sort of the suspicion, that there's a sneaky strategy by which Robin Vos, the Assembly Speaker, will find a way to get a plaintiff to sue, and then the maps will be invalid.
So you're mentioning that this is kind of a weird spot for Evers, where some Democrats are asking him to veto his own drawn maps. But it sounds like some Democrats might actually be in support of this. What are you hearing from some of these groups that have been pushing for these fair maps?
So I would say members of the Democratic Party are super suspicious about this last-minute rush by the Republicans to join Evers and saying, yeah, we want these fair maps. But the nonpartisan groups, Common Cause, the League of Women Voters, the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, instantly issued press releases after the vote celebrating this outcome and saying, this is great. We are finally going to get rid of gerrymandering in Wisconsin. And I spent a lot of time talking to lawyers in the last couple of days because there is this theory that somehow if Evers signs the maps, the Republicans could find a plaintiff, probably a voter, not a Republican, to go to the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals. The chief judge there is Diane Sykes, very conservative, former member of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. She would choose a 3-judge panel, and in this, the buzz is that then they would stall, they would delay, and the maps couldn't be implemented in time for the 2024 election. The thing is, though, that can happen whether the Supreme Court chooses the map or whether Evers signs the map. So it's not really the case that Evers signing or vetoing the map changes that strategy, if there is a strategy to sue. I think it's more likely that lawyers sat down with Republicans and said, look, you have a bunch of bad options here. This is the least bad option. Evers' map doesn't favor Democrats the way some of the other options in front of the Supreme Court do. And the other thing I think that's significant that lawyers have said to me, multiple lawyers in the last couple of days, is just that it's very unusual for the state Supreme Court to choose a map. The whole process is really outside the normal process. So if the legislature passes a map and Evers signs it, it's a bipartisan deal and it's the regular route. And so many courts would be really reluctant to touch that. Even, conservative justices don't necessarily want to carry water for the Republican Party in a completely trumped up challenge. In some ways, Evers signing the maps could give us more security that we would maintain those maps.
And so if you were to put money on this, do you have a sense of whether you'd say the governor would sign this or veto this?
Well, he said he would sign it, and I think that he will. The one issue that he could point to, because he said he would sign it a couple of times if it was exactly the map he proposed, and it is exactly the map he proposed. The difference is the date of implementation. So if it doesn't go into effect right away, if there's this recall challenge against Robin Voss, it doesn't happen under a new map, it happens under the old map, that's a constitutional problem because the Supreme Court has said the current map is unconstitutional. So there could be an appeal to the Supreme Court to change that. The Wisconsin Elections Commission could ask for guidance and could decide whether they can really maintain an unconstitutional map for these spring elections and then start in November. So that's kind of the one hiccup that I think some people hope the governor will grab onto to say, no, let's go for broke. Let's have the Supreme Court impose a different map. But I don't think he will. I think that he's likely to sign it.
Well, we'll have to see coming up this Tuesday or perhaps sooner. We're recording this on Friday, so we will have to see. Ruth Conniff, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.